Hey there, thanks again for joining me on my live stream. Today I'm going to share some of my tips for collaborating with other composers. And there's a number of technical and obviously creative challenges here. Probably the creative ones are obvious, like, you got to work with people that you relate to creatively, and there's a certain amount that you have to be willing to compromise creatively when you're working with people. But I want to focus on the technical side of things and specifically talk about the kinds of things you can do in your workflow as a composer to make sure that you're able to collaborate efficiently and well and get your ideas shared, because that's how they'll really wind up being part of the final outcome. The better you can share your ideas, the more likely they'll survive. But also because you want to stay, this is sort of my mantra, I want to stay away from technical burden, and I want to stay kind of with my blinders on in a creative zone as much as possible. But there are certain aspects of the technical side of this that if you don't manage well, then of course you're just going to be overwhelmed by the technology and it's going to be totally distracting. So there are three things that I think, no matter where you're working, what kind of music you're making, as long as you're using DAWs, which I'm sure everybody who watches this is doing, then there are three things that are going to be crucial when you're collaborating with somebody. First of all, a tempo track. What is the tempo at every moment in the track? That's absolutely essential. Maybe it's really simple and it's just, well, you're working on a track and the whole thing is 120 beats per minute. Great. But if the tempo changes, if there are key signature changes, right? So meter changes, sorry, not key signature, but time signature changes. Those things are absolutely crucial. You've got to know about those. Otherwise, collaborators will be pulling their hair out. So you need to make sure that in your workflow, you're clear for yourself where you might have a time signature change and where you might have a tempo change. And you have to be able to relate that. At the end of this video, I'm going to go into a workflow that I have specifically with Cubase and Dorico. It's rather specific to if you're a Cubase and Dorico user. If you are, congratulations, like me, you found the light and you're working in paradise. If not, then I want to save it for the end of the video just because not everybody's necessarily working in that. Other aspects of what I'm about to talk about, though, I think are useful for any composer. So with a tempo track, let's take a look at this project here and what I've done here, because I think these days almost every DAW is going to have a warp feature. And Cubase is no different. You can actually just use its free warp tool and you can grab any kind of line on the grid and you can slide it around in order to set the grid of your project to an audio file. Now here I'm actually doing a transcription, and I do transcriptions as a way to analyze and understand what other composers are doing. Is this music modal? Is this music major or minor? What's the harmonic structure? Are there patterns that I can kind of extract from other composers' work and learn from and improve my own craft? So I do a lot of transcription. I love it. And this is my preferred workflow. I have Dorico at the bottom. I've got Cubase at the top. And I'll start with an audio file like this. And let me take myself off the screen again. And I'm looking down at the transients in the audio file. And I want to actually sync my grid up to this. Sometimes, a lot of times, these are played by a human being for professional grade scoring. And so they have a little bit of subtle change in the tempo. I was told this track was at 63, but as you can see, there are some slight changes, but very slight, like 1 BPM here, half a BPM, things like that. So I'll use the warp tool to basically warp. And as I do, you see right here, for example, if I warp this line, there's a little dot that's going to, a little dot that appears. And that little dot right here represents a moment in my tempo track. And then I can export this information. And again, I'm going to go into that in detail at the end, how I do that in my exact workflow. But you can always export a tempo track from your DAW. And then when you come to import, you'll find that you can import tempo tracks as well. And this is a pretty standard thing to be able to convey from DAW to DAW. So you might be collaborating with somebody who works in another DAW, and you can share your tempo track with them. Tempo tracks often, or at least if you do a MIDI export of a project, it should also contain not only the tempo track, but the time signature changes, any meter changes, right? Where you have a bar of 2/2 going to a bar 3/4 or something like that, which is very common in scoring because you want to use time signatures to make sure that every now and then you really land on a cut. And I've kind of pointed at that a couple of other in a couple of other videos, but if that's something that you're interested in, please let me know in the comments and I'll make a video more about that. I just take a second and say thank you so much for watching my videos. I really appreciate it. And if you have ideas for things you want me to cover, leave them in the comments. Okay, so back to this chord track, harmony. Cubase has a very robust chord track. This is not unique to Cubase, so make sure you have in your DAW project some kind of representation of your harmony. In Cubase, this could be a chord track, which is actually a bit more of an advanced feature that can actually play back the chords, not just document them. But even if all you've got is a marker track, you can use markers to outline your chords, and that's super, super helpful. The final thing you really got to make sure you're doing when you collaborate with people is you've got to know that you're working with common libraries, right? So if I'm writing all my stuff with session strings, and my collaborator is using Berlin strings, that's going to be a real problem. We need to find some common ground, right? So let's say we're both Cubase users, and we both have Halion Sonic SE, whatever the free version is, right? And we've got like a basic string patch. It's not going to sound as good as Berlin strings, but we can basically write our parts with it, and then we can share our projects that are already plugged into Halion Sonic's string ensemble patch or something like that, right? So if you've both got Berlin strings, then all the better, right? Because you can share a project and you can hook it up with your Berlin strings and they can hook it up with their Berlin strings, and then you can enjoy the fact that you've got all these articulations and it's a great string library. But if you don't share the libraries, it might be a good idea to scale back to some kind of common platform. You could use Spitfire. I think it's Spitfire Discovery. And Spitfire also has a couple of, I think the Originals is a library they have that's like super cheap, and Discovery is free. So there are some libraries out there, you know, that are certainly good enough to do collaborative mockups, and then you can be sure that you have the same plugins. Same thing goes with like reverbs, delays. I prefer not to use a lot of effects on anything that I'm collaborating on until the final moment where we're really mixing. And in that case, we're in the same room. We're not collaborating on the mix remotely, because then it gets really fiddly. You know, do you have this particular delay plugin and this particular IR? And it gets tricky. So I don't really use effects, but if you do, then make sure that your collaborators know what effects you're using, and hopefully that you can work out so you're working from the same palette. Okay, I hope all that was very helpful. If you want to check out at this point, that's fine if you're not a Cubase and Dorico user, but if you are a Cubase and Dorico user and you're looking for a way to either do transcription like this really easily, or more importantly and more to the point of this live stream, you want to be able to manufacture your own tempo map from any audio file. I'm going to show you how to do that. So let me take myself off the screen. And what you see up here is my tempo map, which I have just used the warp tool to drag around so that the grid matches the transients, right? Then I go up to export, and I come down to export MIDI file. Now, if you come down and export MIDI file is grayed out, that's because there's no MIDI tracks in your project. So you just have to have at least one track. I've got this dummy track right here. It doesn't actually have anything on it, but the minute you add a MIDI track, suddenly you can do export MIDI. So I'm going to export my MIDI file, and I'm going to bring it over to Dorico. Now what we've got here, I'm going to play this back for you in Dorico, and I did a talk about this recently too, this TXL time code. plugin right here. And what that does basically is I got it on one of my other monitors here. A TXL timecode plugin is a way to send MIDI timecode from one device or one software to another. And I'm sending it from Dorico into Cubase. I talked about this last week. And if you have questions about it, please leave in the comments. But what I do here is when I play back now, you're going to see that the cursor in Dorico and the cursor in Cubase match up perfectly. And you can hear. So this is great, except you're going to notice that because there are slight tempo changes up here in my tempo track, that it's just a matter of time before my written transcription is no longer in sync. And let's just listen to that. And you can really hear this very, very, very badly. It's terrible. Now, what I'm transcribing here is a melody from Shawshank Redemption. It is not something that I own copyright on, but I'm not sharing the music under that context at all. But just in case you are interested in where this came from, that's where it came from. And I'm doing a transcription because I'm really interested in understanding what's going on harmonically here and melodically. And you can hear how there's this awful delay between what's in Cubase and what's in Dorico. So now I go up to Dorico and I'm going to go to import, and I come down here to tempo track. Now if I import MIDI, then I'm going to be importing things like notes and chords and stuff like that. But if I go to this tempo track, and I had a tempo track in my Cubase project, it's gonna import that, which is really cool. So check this out. So I go to import tempo track, and I am going to go into this project here, and I've got this MIDI file that I exported from Cubase, and it's going to open up my import, like a sort of little import window here. I can choose the flow. I'm going to choose flow 1 here. And I am just leaving everything as it is. And what you're going to notice is down here in Dorico, I'm going to get little signposts. So now I've got these signposts where, you know, my tempo is 64.405 and so on and so forth. You can see how it's changing, and it's changing in relationship to these points in my tempo track here. So now when I come back, it's in perfect sync. I mean, not perfect sync, but good enough. So there's definitely a delay here. But the thing is, that's good enough for me. It doesn't have to be perfect because I'm not actually going to be exporting this or anything. I'll even do this when I'm composing. But what it does gives me close enough that I can figure out with my ears if what I'm transcribing is a 16th note or an 8th note. Is it a downbeat? You know, is it beat 4 or is it the downbeat of the next measure? At a certain point, without a tempo track, and if they're not in sync, then it's kind of disastrous to do that kind of thing. So thanks a lot for checking out the video today. I really appreciate your support. Please like the video if you found it helpful. Please leave comments if you want me to cover more topics, and please subscribe, because subscribing really helps me build up my audience and also helps me get surfaced on YouTube, and that is one of my goals. So I want to reach as large a community as possible. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you next time, which will be in a couple of days. All right, see you later. Bye.